Order. I believe the honourable member for Durham has a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Today I rise for the last time in this chamber. It's been the honour of a lifetime for me to serve Durham in Parliament. My hometowns of Bowmanville and Port Perry, Oshawa, and dozens of small towns and hamlets. But these are just names on signposts. The real honor has been working with and learning from Durham's people, the volunteers, the young people, the civic leaders, the business leaders, Indigenous leaders, first responders. It's been a joy to work with them. But I want to start my remarks by thanking my incredibly supportive and patient wife, Rebecca. You are my true partner in all things, my rock, and my biggest supporter. We dedicated our family to public service, and I think we made a real difference. Thank you. I love you. I'm also incredibly proud of our two children, and I will retain special memories of my time with them. Running in Stanley Park with Molly, fishing for crabs on Vancouver Island with Jack. Thank you for serving Canada, and I love you too. They are here today with my parents and one of my siblings, and I want to thank all of my family for your love and support. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my political family, my friends and family here in the Conservative caucus, my best friends from the military, from law, from the corporate world. You were with me throughout this journey. How many first-time candidates can say they had Wayne Gretzky show up at their first fundraiser? How many candidates have little platoons of veterans knocking on doors with them every election? My success is due to you. You know who you are. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to my incredibly dedicated staff. The number of people who've worked with me over the years in Durham. Your compassion has helped hundreds of families in our community. And to the incredibly bright women and men who came to work with me in Ottawa, in my office as Minister of Veterans Affairs and Leader of the Official Opposition. Often you left good jobs in the private sector or elsewhere to take a chance and face immense challenge. You did this because you believed in me and you believed in this country. Thank you, and I will never forget your efforts. I'm also incredibly proud of the accomplishments we made together, both in government and in opposition. The last full sitting day of 2012 is when I first entered this chamber. Actually, it wasn't this chamber, it's the real one up the way, Mr. Speaker, but I had the pleasure, the honor of being escorted in as a by-election winner by Prime Minister Stephen Harper and by the late Jim Flaherty. Jim Flaherty was a political mentor to me, a colleague of my father's from Queen's Park, and to have my family in the audience that day taking my seat for the first time is a memory I will never forget. And a few months later, I had the honor to then work with my friend, the honourable member from Abbotsford, as his Parliamentary Secretary for Trade at a time that Canada had its most ambitious trade agenda in history, helping to finalize our free trade agreement with the European Union, traveling to Seoul, South Korea to help drive home a final deal for our first free trade agreement in Asia. And while in Seoul, taking the time to lay a wreath for the hundreds of Canadians who died helping that great country earn its freedom. Working with our friends, the United States of America and other countries in the Americas. What an exciting time for a brand new MP. And I will never forget the day that I was sworn into cabinet. The memory of Molly explaining to her 3-year-old brother Jack that we were going to Rideau Hall, and Rideau Hall was kind of like the home of the Queen's friend in Canada. And then an hour later to see Jack, knowing it was the Queen's friend, but still standing on the couch in his shoes. That's a memory Rebecca and I will always keep. But what an honor for a Canadian Armed Forces veteran to be able to expand mental health treatments for our veterans, to reduce wait times, to start to win trust back from a generation of Afghanistan war veterans that were already feeling forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I traveled to more legions than anyone in Canada in that time. And I can tell you, I was yelled at more legions than anyone in Canada at that time. But sometimes listening, tough talk, and humility are ways to start to earn back trust. By restoring the memory of World War I soldier and MP Sam Sharp, to expanding benefits for veterans and their families, to forging friendships with the Equitas veterans who had been suing our government. I gave it my best in the time we had, and I truly believe we made a real difference. And then, Mr. Speaker, getting the chance to serve as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, the party of confederation, the party of the Bill of Rights, of leading the global fight against apartheid, of calling out at an early time the aggression of Vladimir Putin. This was the zenith of my time in politics. And given the pandemic, polarization, and uncertain prospects at the time, I took that responsibility very, very seriously. And I do believe that we made a real difference.
I'm proud of my team and of our work for the country. Work on the economy, innovation, mental health, reconciliation, our values and our interests on the world stage. We proposed smart policies for our future. It was also an honor for me, an Anglophone MP from Ontario, to honor the Quebecois nation and to participate in debates that are important to Quebec, to its culture, its language, its identity. As a leader, I often said, we must preserve the existence of the only French-speaking nation in North America. There are 7 million Francophones in Quebec and across the country in an ocean of almost 400 million inhabitants of North America. We must recognize that this is something that is very special and we must protect it. This is a patriotic project. It's a truly Canadian project, Mr. Speaker.
And now I end my time in this chamber as it began, Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Durham, as a husband, as a father, as someone who believes deeply in Canada. And this is why, in my final moments, in my last time in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, I want to share my thoughts with my fellow parliamentarians. Over a century ago, as war raged in Europe, Prime Minister Borden said this about a Canada coming together to meet the challenges of its age. Quote, "In the awful conditions which confront the world today, why should the political future of any individual or the political fortunes of any party stand for one moment across the path of a great national purpose?" Mr. Speaker, war is again touching Europe, and democracy is being strained in many parts of the world. With this in mind, all of us in this chamber must ask ourselves, what is our great national purpose at this critical moment in history? There will be an important counteroffensive from Ukraine in the war this spring, and Canadian soldiers have helped train our friends in the Ukrainian army. But just last week, we learned that Canadian soldiers in Latvia were forced to buy their own helmets. This news came mere weeks after learning that the Prime Minister had told other world leaders that Canada had no intention of paying its fair share in NATO. The country that in Borden's time secured victory at Vimy Ridge now has its soldiers buying its own kit. The country that helped draft the NATO Charter now is saying it's not willing to pay and support it. This chamber should always ensure that the men and women have the equipment they need to do the job we ask them to do, and that our country never wavers from its commitment to peace, security, and living up to our word. That should be our national purpose, Mr. Speaker. There are Indigenous youth in Canada who voted for the first time for people here in this chamber. Yet some of these Canadians have never been able to drink the water in their community. It's our job to ensure that every child has access to clean drinking water and a fair chance to succeed in life. That should be part of our national purpose. It takes a decade to get a pipeline built to Tidewater in this country, 2 decades to get a mine into operation. Canada has been slowing down at a time the world is asking us to speed up. Getting Canadian resources to global markets for both our economy and our environment should be our shared national purpose, Mr. Speaker. There are many challenges facing Canada at this time, but there are also incredible opportunities waiting to be seized. But that is not happening today. Instead of leading, instead of debating our national purpose in this chamber, too many of us are often chasing algorithms down a sinkhole of diversion and division. We are becoming elected officials who judge our self-worth by how many likes we get on social media, but now not how many lives we change in the real world. Performance politics is fueling polarization. Virtue signaling is replacing discussion. And far too often, Mr. Speaker, we're just using this chamber to generate clips, not to start national debates. Social media did not build this great country, but it is starting to tear its democracy down. If we're not careful, there will soon be a generation of young voters who have never even heard a point of view different from their own. I fear the ignorance of the views of others will slowly transform into a dislike of others. And we can see that starting to happen, Mr. Speaker. Canada is a frontier country. We were built on the strength of the fur trade, a country where going hunting with your grandfather or an elder is as quintessentially Canadian as the backyard hockey rink. But today, hunters are often demonized as a threat to society by politicians who know that this is not true. Whole rural swaths of our country are being held up as the problem only to secure a few political points in the suburbs. Mr. Speaker, we are a country that sent our citizens far from our shores several times to fight for liberty alongside other countries in multilateral efforts. Canadian diplomats, including a future Prime Minister, have drafted the agreements built on that sacrifice to give us decades of peace and security. NATO, the United Nations, the Commonwealth. But today, too often, we're allowing conspiracy theories about the UN or the World Economic Forum go unchallenged, or we attribute sinister motives to these organizations or people in a way that is simply not true or not fair. And if we do this more, we're allowing others to define the debate for us. We risk allowing others to set the course for this country because too many members on all sides of this chamber, from time to time, I've been guilty of it myself, Mr. Speaker, we're becoming followers of our followers when we should be leaders. One member from the other side of the House told me, Mr. Speaker, that they no longer speak to their brother because of the divisive nature of the vaccine debates in the last election. Canadian families are in some cases finding it difficult to talk to each other about important issues. If we ever want to change this and begin to have respectful and serious discussions again, Mr. Speaker, That change needs to start right here in Canada's House of Commons. Why should the political future of any single member of this chamber or the electoral success of any one party stand in the way of our unity, of the prosperity we want to give to our children? Preserving these things and rising to meet the unique challenges facing Canada and the world today needs to be our national purpose. As members of Parliament, we must always put the country first. We must lead and not just follow. We must strive to inspire and be careful not to incite. And we must debate with insightful reason, not just tweet out of frustration. Because if we don't, Mr. Speaker, decades in the future, Canadians will point to this Parliament as the time when our national decline began. But colleagues, I don't think that will happen. I'm an optimist, and I hope you all reflect on some of these things over the summer, because I believe that Canada's best days are actually ahead of us, Mr. Speaker. I believe in this great country and its people. And friends, I believe in each of you. It's been an honor to serve with you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
I want to thank my good friend from Durham, and I believe there's a few other comments to be had. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to rise today to speak about a neighbour and longtime colleague, a friend who, while we disagreed vociferously on many different issues, had in his heart always the interest of Durham and his country. And I want to start by saying to the member of Durham, a profound thank you for your service to Durham, to our community, and to our country. We don't often enough, Mr. Speaker, rise in our place to recognize the contribution that people give who have different opinions than us. But when the member opposite, the member for Durham, talks about the darkness that is casting a shadow over this world right now, how remarkable is it that we live in a country where when we say goodbye to one another and thank one another for our service, we can recognize that which is good in the other person and recognize that the debate that we have, the differences that we have, the way that we exchange those differences in this place is what makes Canada so very special and is at the core of what so much of the member opposite talked about. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to meet the member for Durham in a way that's most fitting, out in the community, giving back well before he was in elected office. This was an individual who was giving to charity and active in his community, involved in the Legion, involved in any important cause. He was somebody who, like his father before him, John, who served our community admirably. I knew I could go to and have a conversation about what mattered for our community and where we needed to put aside partisan differences. And of course, the member for Durham didn't just serve this House, didn't just serve his community as a volunteer. He also served in the military, where he went as far as a captain. And he put his life on the line for our country, Mr. Speaker, something that we're profoundly grateful for. He was also a lawyer, and as he mentioned, a minister of the Crown, a remarkable accomplishment, and one that I know he holds deep in his heart. And I want to talk about that for 1 second, because I think, Mr. Speaker, when we think about what he did, along with partnering with Senator Romeo Dallaire, to raise awareness for Samuel Sharp, not only the memorial here, the memorial in Uxbridge, but really to bring to attention the issue of mental health in our armed services generally. that was something that he took out of his time serving in the military, I know, and attacked with great passion in his time as a cabinet minister. And something I'm deeply appreciative of, and it's a conversation which we have to continue. And I also would say that he had a real sense of fun, and was somebody who was up for the challenge of doing something different. You know, I was just talking to the Minister for Families when she was the Minister for Democratic Institutions, and an event most of us attend, Politics in the Pen. He was asked to dance publicly, something he'd never done before. And he was there in a 1940s-style swing dance, doing it because he wanted to help out. And if I can't imagine, I don't know that I'm big enough to put myself on display like that to dance publicly. But he did for something that he cared about. But most of all, as you heard in the member for Durham's speech, he is first and foremost a father to Molly and to Jack, a husband to Rebecca, a son to John, who I know well, and so I'll say John specifically, but just somebody who really had family at the center of his life. And I want to say to his family, as somebody who knows deeply the sacrifice of public life, to your family, to the member for Durham, thank you for their sacrifice so that you could be shared in this place and share your voice and your service. Being leader of a party, I can't imagine the level of sacrifice and the level of scrutiny. But I do think that we have to pay a particular respect to those that would step forward in the space of leadership, particularly in this time. The member talks about the destructive power of social media and the nastiness that's going around. There's not a member in this House who isn't subject to it. There isn't one of us who haven't had to look at something and strike us in our heart as being deeply cruel and mean. And to have his family subjected to that as well, Mr. Speaker, is something incredibly difficult. But he stood and fought for what he believed in. And we have a democracy that we can thank for that. And perhaps that's something that we can be called to in this moment when we talk about the former Prime Minister Borden's call to a greater purpose. That greater purpose is our democracy. It is the respect that we show for one another. That as we have debates and differences, we recognize that those differences are so small compared to the love we have for this country, the love we have for serving our community. Because in our words and in our differences of policy, the member for Durham and I had very vigorous debates and disagreements. But in one another's eyes, we see a love for our community, a love for our country, and a desire to serve. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the member of Durham, thank you for your service to this place and to our country. I wish you every success in the days ahead.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I rise today in praise of a life of service to Canada. The member for Durham is a Canadian first and a Canadian servant above all. He started his adult life at military college, went through law school, had a successful career in law, but then instead of turning that success into simply to personal riches for himself, turned it into generosity towards others. He became known for his commitment to philanthropy and volunteer work, sitting on the board of True Patriot Love, where he raised countless dollars to help wounded veterans. This was something already close to his heart because, of course, he himself had served in the armed forces. And it was in the forces that he learned about loyalty, discipline, planning, strategy, all qualities that he would put to successful use in his service towards others. He would go on to follow in his father's footsteps, his father John, having been a very respected member of provincial parliament, acting as a great mentor to his son. And the member for Durham would present himself in a by-election, and I think we can all agree he was someone who was elected locally, not on a party brand, but on his personal notoriety around the community. Places, streets, community halls, coffee shops where he had frequented since childhood, came out in droves to elect him to be their servant in this place. And after being elected, he would make great sacrifices, for which I not only thank him, but also want to thank his wife, Rebecca, and his daughter, Molly, and son, Jack, who had to spend weekends and often evenings without him as he was traveling on the road. He was very quickly elevated to Minister of the Crown. In fact, he was in cabinet with lightning speed as then Prime Minister Harper recognized his ability, his knowledge, and his prior experience, making him Minister of Veterans Affairs. Now, this was a difficult time in that portfolio because, of course, Canada was grappling with a new generation of veterans. We had, prior to that, all known of the great veterans of the Second World War, of the Korean War, and of peacekeeping and other missions throughout the latter half of the 20th century. But for the first time in a very long time, we were dealing with the new challenges of young men and women who had served on the battlefield in an extremely dangerous and violent place, southern Afghanistan, and who were coming home with new problems with which we were not yet equipped to deal. His role was to transform and modernize programs so that they could serve those veterans who had suffered so greatly and whose needs were so grand. And I remember the time when he was minister, and he would be on the road up until late at night, sitting in a Legion Hall, hearing the concerns and sometimes even the complaints of military veterans who were feeling strangled by a bureaucratic program, or that they weren't getting a prompt response to their concern, and to deal with others who were there to say thank you for the excellent service that he had managed to turn around in his, at that time, very short time as Veterans Affairs Minister. I remember the stories of him being up late at night on those famous Facebook chat groups, which he described as the virtual Legion Hall, where he would sit there in front of his computer until 1 or 2 in the morning, and veterans who were up late as well could ping questions and comments, complaints, suggestions off him, and he would respond personally, not through staff, personally, and in real time, sitting, I imagine, in his family living room in darkness, but for that screen glowing on his face. In these moments, we saw a true public servant. He would go on to run 2 very impressive leadership campaigns, one of them successful, where he became leader of His Majesty, Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada, and ran a spirited election campaign in very difficult circumstances, constrained by a pandemic that prevented the normal human interaction that typifies election campaigns. But he came through it and has been, he remains a statesman in our party. He has served loyally the people in his community, the people of Canada. And we know that wherever he goes, whatever chapter he decides to write in his life, one thing is for sure, that it will be consistent with the life of service that has personified everything he has done to date. And I look forward to watching that service and learning from his wisdom and experience. And so on behalf of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition, on behalf of all Conservatives, and I think I could say on behalf of all Canadians, we thank you for your incredible service, and if you'll allow me to break the standing orders, just to say thank you to Erin O'Toole and the entire O'Toole family. Your nation is deeply grateful, and we will always be in your debt. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to speak today to honour the member for Durham, who I had the pleasure of getting to know more personally last year in May 2022 when we were on mission to Washington, D.C. We had a great time together. We had a few glasses of wine and a few beers at the reception at the embassy, and then at a delicious restaurant and I would encourage everyone to try the Old Edinburgh in Washington. But before I knew the member politically, in the campaign of 2021, he came to my riding many times. He wanted to win that riding, and he was supporting his candidate in the riding at that time, and promised $7 million for an agri-food R&D center. And you can imagine that in Saint-Hyacinthe, there were a lot of people who were keen on that investment. So I have to say, sincerely, I wasn't too pleased with him at that time. But the departure of the member for Durham certainly marks the end of an era. It's the end of a decade as a member of Parliament serving his constituents, first and foremost, but also as former Minister of Veterans Affairs under the Harper government. But it's probably not the end of his public service for people in general. I recently crossed paths with him, and he told me what area he was going to be working in, and I probably will have to work with him. And since we're both in Ottawa, hopefully we can chat around over a beer and perhaps maybe not change the world or save the world, but at least move things forward. It's public knowledge that he formerly served in the armed forces. And let's be honest here, the member is probably too young to retire, but too old to change his true nature, and that is public service. Wherever he winds up, I am certain that he will end up in public service. His departure marks the end of an era for the Conservative Party. He was elected leader in 2020, just before the election of 2021. I was listening to his speech, and I remembered an earlier speech he did, the first speech as in the House here as leader of the official opposition in 2020. And as we say back home, it was a longie but a goodie. I remember that his vision of Canada, of its future, was irreconcilable with our vision of Quebec's future, and we disagreed with some of his public policy, but I recognized who he was talking to. He was talking to people I know, and in that election campaign, he proposed a contract with Quebec. Ultimately, there weren't so many takers, but it wasn't for a lack of understanding what distinguishes Quebecers, and not for lack of building on common ground that could have been very promising. His choice of priorities wasn't necessarily the same as the Bloc's, but we have to admit that on some issues, like standing up to the Chinese regime, he was way out in head, and congratulations for that. But coming back to his first speech as leader in 2020, we really got the impression that we were going to be dealing with a really good political adversary. We were going to have good debate, but obviously a lot of water has flowed under the bridges since. Some might even say torrents of water. But the member for Durham has not changed, as he proved a few days ago with his speech on Chinese interference, of which he was a direct target. What he said was spot on, and he has statesmanship that he has been proud to maintain. We will remember his time here as the member for Durham, and his calls for a public inquiry. He was able to put his country ahead of his party. He was concerned about the future of all his constituents. He was as humble about the importance of the role of a member here as he was firm when it came time to protect democracy. He was an upstanding individual. On behalf of the Bloc, I'd like to thank the member for Durham for his years here in the House of Commons. His political party will miss him. Some might take a bit longer to realize it, but they will miss him too. And the House will certainly miss him, and the people of his region, even though they know he'll never be very far away. We wish him every success in his future endeavors. Thank you.
Before going to the next speaker, I just want to make sure it's my duty pursuant to Standing Order 38 to inform the House that the question to be raised tonight at the time of adjournment is as follows. The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre on taxation. The Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and pay some words of tribute to the Member of Parliament for Durham, who I first met or encountered as a newly minted MP. The member for Durham was his party's critic for, at that time, Bill C7, which had to do with RCMP collective bargaining. And it was my first assignment to a bill, and I sat in on the Public Safety Committee. And I have to say, debating that bill with the member for Durham, I think gave me an unrealistic expectation about some of the debate in this place, because it was principled and sophisticated and well executed. And it was a pleasure, even though we didn't agree on all of the points of that bill, in fact disagreed on many of them, to carry out parliamentary debate in the style that I thought was appropriate. In fact, things got so downright collegial that it earned him a quote in one of my very first householders. It was not an authorized quote, but it was on the public records. It was fair game. And now that he's leaving public life, I feel it's time to reciprocate. So I may have a few nice things to say. That relationship developed further later in the 42nd Parliament when I had the honor of sitting in on a study of Canadian sovereignty in the North. And so we were able to travel Northern Canada together. It was that was a great trip in its own right, and I learned a lot there. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about that trip was the opportunity to get to know the member for Durham better and to discuss some of the issues of the day in less public fora. And so that was certainly a pleasure. And I think one of the lessons of that experience for me, and for folks who would go and look at that report or the joint all-party press conference that we did at the end of that study, I think it was a fine example of how parliamentarians coming from different political movements and with different ideas about where the country should head, when they roll up their sleeves and they immerse themselves in the study of an important issue together, can find ways to find common ground instead of just finding ways to wedge and divide. And I think that report showed nicely that, you know, the priorities of maintaining Canada's sovereignty in the North and some of the military components of that can dovetail nicely with an emphasis on investing in the people of the North and making sure that their needs are met. I was very proud of the work that we all did together in order to make that case here to Parliament and more widely to Canadians. So as I say, I think one of the great contributions, and this was demonstrated later when the member for Durham became leader of the Conservative Party, was an ability to state differences of opinion in a principled way and in a way that promoted the kind of debate that I think Canadians want to see from their politicians. They don't need to see us agree on everything all the time or to cover over important differences, but to explore them in ways that are far more constructive than we sometimes explore those differences in this place. He talked earlier about the tendency towards division that we're witnessing in politics right now and the dangers of performance politics. I think we can say with hindsight that the member for Durham exhibited a refreshing lack of demagoguery in the way that he presented the Conservative position. And for that, I'm grateful, as I know many Canadians are. And there's a lot of lessons for all of us to learn in that, in terms of how we carry ourselves in public debate. I know that that can be a difficult thing to do, not just for members themselves, but especially for their family. And so I too want to add my voice to the chorus of thanks to Rebecca, Molly, and Jack, who supported their husband and father through this journey, and to thank on behalf of New Democrats the member for Durham for his service in this place, and to offer my well wishes for what awaits him as he exits public life. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for Durham.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's an honour to rise in this place to add the voice of the Greens caucus in saying farewell to the Honourable Member for Durham. And he is, and I think exemplifies the term, an honorable member. I certainly will never forget, and there are a lot of colleagues in this place where if you ask me, when did you first meet so-and-so? I'll just pick a so-and-so out of the blue, the honourable member for the honourable member for Winnipeg, Strathcona, who just spoke. I can't remember the first time we met. We've known each other forever. When was the first time? How would we know? The same thing applies to many friends around this place. But I remember, and the honourable member for Durham knows this, with crystal clear clarity the moment we met, because it was right after his election in the 2012 by-election. And winning me over forever, he came up and said, I want to say hi. I went to Dow Law School too. So that's kind of, those of us who went to Dalhousie Law School hold that in common. Although, not that I need to mention it, but he did graduate 20 years after me. So we weren't classmates, although we would have had fun if we had been. I also want to add my thanks to Rebecca and Molly and Jack. And particularly, they'll probably remember a candid and fun moment we all had together at the Billy Bishop Airport. There's nothing like making friends across party lines and truly meaning it. The honourable member for Durham has stood for what I think is the best about this place and the best of being Canadian, which is to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. He has conducted himself in this place with the gravitas that comes with being a party leader, with speaking across party lines, again, having differences, but not descending to what, and he mentioned in his speech, which I appreciated, the business of manipulating algorithms. No one could accuse the honourable member for Durham of being interested in rage farming. I hope, and I'll end here because you've had a lot of speeches and I think the whole family is probably keen to get going to something more fun. But let me just add that I hope the rest of their lives together will be more fun. That the times to be together as family and to continue to contribute to this country and the life of this country, as he has done in the military and as he has done in this place, will continue to come to him. And the country and those of us who appreciate the way in which he's conducted himself in politics, that we will all be able to reflect that the time together as family and good times is well deserved and well received. God bless you and thank you.
Before we close this one up, I'll use a little bit of Speaker's prerogative as well. Knowing Erin and of course Rebecca for probably close to 20-some years now, I've been honored to be able to work with you, work alongside you. Thank you for your service on behalf of this House of Commons. Don't go too far. Canada still needs you. And we do hope that you come visit us on occasions and keep us up to date on what's going on because, of course, your friendship is always very important to many of us, to Molly and Jack and to Rebecca as well. So thank you very much. There you go. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll just give it a second here, and then we go to a point of privilege. So I'm going to give it a minute, just to everybody can shake their hands and give their hugs, and then we'll restart again.